For years, a black waiter served a disabled woman, until her death, when she left him her keys and a shocking message. On Harbor City's busiest corner stood the Brass Spoon, a restaurant polished to gleam, famous for its Friday night rush and its white linen exclusivity. To regulars, it was a hangout of familiar faces, where laughter rang as freely as wine glasses clinked. But for Jordan Miles, it was never simple. He was the only black waiter on staff, visible in ways that left him both proud and isolated. Every shift, he walked a tightrope, delivering flawless service while brushing off the subtle slights that reminded him he didn't fully belong. That night, the door swung open with its usual brass jangle, but what followed wasn't usual at all. The crowd thinned just enough for Jordan to notice a woman struggling at the entrance. Her wheelchair was wedged against the heavy oak door, her hands trembling with the effort to push it forward. Jordan didn't think twice. He set his tray on the counter, rushed across the floor, and swung the door wide. "Let me help you with that," he said warmly. She looked up, her hair silver, her expression a blend of frustration and relief. "Thank you," she whispered. Jordan steadied her chair and guided her inside. The restaurant buzzed on, but at that table by the window, something rare had begun. A friendship born not of menus and orders, but of human kindness. Jordan didn't know then how much that single moment would change his life, or how the same woman, Eleanor Whitfield, would leave him with something he could never have imagined. Jordan led Eleanor to a corner table by the window, sliding a chair out of the way so her wheelchair had space. "Is this all right for you?" he asked, his tone careful but genuine. "It's perfect," she said, her voice soft but steady. She glanced around the bustling room, then back at him with a smile that reached her eyes. "I'm Eleanor. Jordan, I'll be taking care of you tonight." He draped a napkin over her lap with quiet dignity. She ordered a simple meal, and though his other tables demanded attention, Jordan found himself checking on her more often than necessary. Each time, she greeted him with gratitude and warmth. By the end of the evening, their exchanges had shifted. The small talk about food and weather gave way to neighborhood stories and bits of history Eleanor carried with ease. She had spent 4 decades as a teacher, guiding students through the civil rights era, and now she found herself teaching again, only this time to a single student who was listening closer than he realized. As Jordan helped her with her coat, Eleanor paused. "It's not just your service," she said. "It's your kindness. You made me feel welcome here." Those words followed him long after she rolled out into the night. For a man used to blending into the background, being seen so clearly felt like a gift. And the next Friday, when the bell above the door jingled again, Eleanor was back. Friday after Friday, Eleanor returned. By now, the staff had grown used to her presence, and Jordan made sure her favorite table by the window was always waiting. Their conversations grew deeper. What began with food and small talk stretched into literature, history, and the hidden rules of life. Eleanor spoke with a teacher's rhythm, each word deliberate. "You know, Jordan," she said one evening as he refilled her tea, "I spent years teaching about segregation. Separate water fountains may be gone, but exclusion just found new furniture." Her eyes searched his face, and Jordan didn't have to pretend. He had felt it all week. Customers waving him off, saying, "We'd prefer someone else." He smiled through it, as he always did, but every rejection left a bruise. "It shouldn't get to me," he admitted quietly. "But sometimes it does." Eleanor reached across the table, her voice steady. "Of course it does. You're not invisible, Jordan. Don't ever let them make you believe you are." That night, when he walked her to the door, something had shifted. This was no longer just a customer and her waiter. This was an unlikely pair, a black man in his 30s and a white woman in her 70s, bound by a friendship that cut through race, age, and circumstance. Neither of them knew the storm was already gathering in the shadows of the Brass Spoon. The hum of the Brass Spoon shifted the day Brent Carver arrived. A manager in a crisp suit, he walked the floor like a drill sergeant, eyes scanning for flaws. To staff he spoke in clipped orders, praising no one and correcting everyone. But to Jordan, his comments cut sharper than the rest. "You need to smile more, look friendlier," Brent said one afternoon, though Jordan was already known for his warmth. Another time, Brent pulled him aside near the service station. "Maybe try to blend in more, don't stand out so much." The words sounded professional on the surface, but Jordan heard what they really meant. At first, Jordan tried to ignore it, telling himself it wasn't worth the energy. But Eleanor noticed the change. One Friday, as she watched him move between tables, she caught the slump in his shoulders, the forced grin that didn't reach his eyes. When he sat down for a quick moment to pour her tea, she leaned in. "He's gotten to you, hasn't he?" Jordan hesitated, then sighed. "Some people still can't see past the color of my skin, and this new guy, he makes sure I feel it." Eleanor's gaze softened, filled with the same fire she'd carried into her classroom decades ago. "Jordan, don't mistake their prejudice for your worth. Dignity isn't something they can take. It's something you choose to keep." Her words steadied him, but Brent's grip on the restaurant was tightening. Rules grew harsher, surveillance cameras sprouted in corners, and the back room once filled with laughter turned silent. What used to be a haven was turning into a cage, and soon Brent's cruelty would no longer stop with Jordan. The weeks under Brent's command dragged like heavy chains. Shifts once filled with a steady rhythm of orders and laughter now carried an edge of fear. Staff whispered in corners, afraid of being overheard by the new surveillance cameras he'd installed. Breaks were shorter, critiques sharper, and every mistake, no matter how small, was broadcast over the earpieces they were forced to wear. For Jordan, the scrutiny was relentless. Brent shadowed his steps, nitpicking where no flaw existed. If Jordan's tray wobbled for half a second, Brent's voice hissed through the earpiece, steadier, miles. If Jordan took too long with a customer, Brent snapped, "Move faster. Don't linger." Even Jordan's natural warmth became a target. "Tone it down. This isn't a comedy show. You're here to serve, not perform." Jordan's smile, once genuine, became a mask. Behind it, resentment simmered, but he refused to let Brent see him break. Still, the weight pressed down, heavier with each passing shift. Eleanor felt it too. Her Friday visits, once a bright spot, became moments of quiet concern. She would watch Jordan glide between tables, his posture stiff, his laughter muted, and she would know. One evening, as he poured her tea, she caught his wrist gently. "Jordan, they are squeezing the light out of you," she whispered. "I've seen it before, in classrooms, in workplaces, in history books. And I'll tell you this, if you let them take your spirit, they've already won." Jordan forced a small smile, more for her sake than his own. "I'll keep standing, Eleanor. I always have." But then, Brent crossed a line even Jordan couldn't ignore. It was a chilly evening, and Eleanor rolled herself into the brass spoon with the same grace she always carried. But before Jordan could greet her, Brent intercepted at the door. His tone was flat, his expression rehearsed. "Miss Whitfield, I'm afraid we can't accommodate you anymore. Your wheelchair makes it difficult for staff and customers to move freely. It's a disruption." The words landed like stones. For a moment, silence fell across the entryway. Jordan, setting down a tray at another table, froze. His chest tightened as he watched Eleanor's face, caught between shock and indignation. "Excuse me?" she said firmly. "I've been coming here for months." "Why now?" Brent didn't blink. "It's a business decision, nothing personal." Jordan was already moving, weaving past startled diners until he stood between Eleanor and Brent. His voice carried, clear and unshaken. "She has every right to be here. If Eleanor goes, I go. You'll have to fire me, because I won't work in a place that treats people this way." The restaurant fell into a hush. Patrons shifted in their seats, murmuring, some nodding quietly in support. Eleanor's eyes glistened, not with weakness, but with pride. Jordan had done what few dared. He had drawn a line. Brent's jaw tightened, his cold stare fixed on Jordan. "Careful," he muttered. "You're making a mistake." But Jordan knew better. The real mistake would have been staying silent. The next morning, Jordan dressed for work with care. His uniform was pressed, his shoes polished, his posture steady. But beneath the crisp white shirt beat a restless heart. He knew Brent wouldn't let last night slide. Each step toward the manager's office felt like a countdown. Inside, Brent sat behind the desk, his voice stripped of pretense. "Jordan, what you did last night, challenging me in front of staff and customers, was unacceptable. You undermined my authority, and that cannot stand." Jordan kept his eyes level. "I stood up for what was right. Eleanor deserved dignity, not exclusion." Brent leaned back, lips curling in disdain. "You don't get to decide policy. You're here to serve food, not pass judgment. As of now, you're dismissed." He slid a severance check across the desk like a final insult. Jordan stared at the paper but didn't touch it. "If defending someone's humanity means losing this job, then so be it," he said, his voice steady even as his chest tightened. With that, he walked out carrying only a box of his belongings. Outside, the cold air bit his skin, but something else hit harder. Eleanor waiting at the curb. When her eyes fell on the box, her face crumpled. "Oh, Jordan," she whispered, her voice thick with regret. "This is because of me." "No," he said firmly, kneeling so their eyes met. "This is because of him. I'd rather leave with my dignity intact than stay silent in his shadow." She reached for his hand, squeezing tightly. "Still, I wish I could have done more." Jordan shook his head. "You already did. You stood by me. That's more than most ever have." They embraced on the sidewalk, an unlikely pair, united by shared struggle. Neither of them noticed the bystander across the street who had filmed the entire confrontation the night before. The video was already spreading online, its headline simple but piercing. "Black waiter defends disabled teacher, gets fired for it." Within hours, Harbor City was talking. By morning, the nation would be. By dawn, the video had spread beyond Harbor City. A shaky clip shot from a diner's phone showed everything. The icy calm in Brent's voice, the tremor in Eleanor's as she defended her right to dine, and Jordan's steady declaration, "If she goes, I go." On social media, outrage ignited. Some shared the clip with captions like "Courage in the face of cruelty." Others wrote threads about the double discrimination, racism and ableism colliding in one restaurant doorway. By noon, local news anchors replayed the footage on loop. By evening, national outlets had picked it up. At the Brass Spoon, regular customers began calling in, demanding answers. Reservations were canceled. Reviews flooded the internet, not about the food, but about the shame of what people had witnessed. The restaurant's polished reputation cracked overnight. In his office, the real owner, Mr. Hartley Stevens, sat in disbelief. He had been away on business, blind to Brent's methods. Now, the truth stared at him from a glowing screen. His establishment, once a community jewel, was now branded a place of cruelty. Mr. Stevens acted swiftly. Brent was summoned, confronted, and dismissed. "This restaurant was built on community trust," Stevens told him coldly, "and you destroyed it." But firing Brent wasn't enough. That evening, Stevens called Jordan directly, arranging to meet at a small cafe down the street. When Jordan arrived, still weary from the whirlwind, Stevens rose from his chair, looking more contrite than commanding. "Jordan," he began, his voice steady but subdued, "I owe you more than an apology. What you endured never should have happened. Not under my roof." Jordan crossed his arms, skeptical but silent. "I watched the video," Stevens continued. "I saw your integrity, your courage, and I saw a manager who betrayed everything I wanted this place to stand for. I want you back, Jordan, not just as an employee, but as someone who helps me make this right." For the first time in days, Jordan allowed himself to breathe. The decision wasn't simple. Trust couldn't be restored with words alone, but the chance to return on his own terms, to reshape the very space that had once tried to break him, was something worth considering. Still, in the back of his mind, Jordan knew the real story wasn't over. Because, while the restaurant's future was shifting, Eleanor's health was slipping quietly into the shadows. Jordan agreed to return, but only after making himself clear. "If I come back," he told Mr. Stevens, "it has to be different. Respect isn't optional. Not for me, not for anyone." Stevens nodded, humbled. "It will be. You have my word." And so, within days, Jordan walked back through the restaurant doors. Not as the weary man who had left in shame, but as someone the staff now looked to with renewed respect. Regulars greeted him warmly, some even standing to applaud. The once stiff atmosphere began to soften. Laughter cautiously returned to the break room, and customers noticed the shift in tone. But even as the Brass Spoon found its rhythm again, Jordan's thoughts lingered elsewhere. Eleanor had missed 2 Fridays in a row. The 3rd Friday came, and still no sign of her silver hair at the door, no warm smile waiting by the window. Concern gnawed at him until, finally, he picked up the phone. Her voice on the other end was weaker than he remembered. "Jordan, I'm sorry. I haven't been well. My body isn't as resilient as my spirit, it seems." She tried to make light of it, but her shallow breathing betrayed the truth. Jordan's chest tightened. "Eleanor, don't apologize. Just tell me what you need." "Anything. Just hearing your voice helps," she whispered. "I do miss our Fridays. The tea, the laughter, and the company." After the call ended, Jordan stood silently by his apartment window, staring at the city lights. For the first time, he admitted to himself that time with Eleanor was running out. She had been his anchor through storms of prejudice and humiliation. Now she was slipping, and he felt powerless to stop it. As autumn deepened, Jordan threw himself back into work. Each shift at the Brass Spoon felt different now. Staff looked to him with quiet respect, and customers often asked for his section. He carried himself with more purpose, determined to turn the restaurant into what it should have been all along, a place of welcome. But behind that polished service, life pressed in harder than he let on. His roommate moved out unexpectedly, leaving Jordan to cover rent alone. Bills piled up quickly. His mother's medication costs, his younger sister's college tuition, and now the weight of an apartment he couldn't afford. Then came the letter slipped under his door, an eviction notice. 30 days to leave. Jordan folded it up and tucked it into a drawer, unwilling to burden anyone. Not his family, not his co-workers, and certainly not Eleanor, who was already facing her own battle. Because Eleanor's absence at the restaurant had grown longer. When Jordan visited her one weekend, she greeted him with a frail smile. The once vibrant woman who sparred with him over books and history now moved slowly, her breath shallow. Still, her eyes carried the same fire. "I've been thinking a lot about legacy," she told him as they sipped tea in her sunlit living room. "It's not what we leave to people, it's what we leave in them." She reached for his hand. "You've left plenty in me, Jordan. I hope I've done the same for you." Jordan swallowed hard, holding her gaze. "You have, Eleanor. More than you know." What he didn't realize was that Eleanor had already set a plan in motion. Quietly, with her lawyer, she had begun drafting a trust. A safety net not just for Jordan's housing, but for his future. A gift he would not discover until it was too late to thank her in person. Winter crept into Harbor City, sharp winds cutting through the streets, but Jordan barely noticed. His routine became a cycle: work double shifts, scrape together bills, and then stop by Eleanor's house on weekends to check on her. Her living room, once alive with books and laughter, had grown quieter. Shelves still overflowed with her well-worn history volumes, but now oxygen tubes snaked across the carpet, and the steady hiss of the machine filled the silence between their conversations. Yet Eleanor's mind was sharp as ever. She asked about his mother's health, his sister's studies, even the smallest details of his art. "Don't hide your burdens from me," she told him one evening, her voice weak but insistent. A teacher always knows when her student is carrying too much. Jordan hesitated before admitting the truth. "I might lose my apartment. Rent's doubled. I don't know how I'll manage it all." Eleanor pressed his hand with surprising strength. "You've carried more weight than anyone should, Jordan. Let me carry some for you." He shook his head. "You've already given me more than I can repay." She smiled softly. "I don't want repayment. I want continuity. That's what legacy really means." Days later, Eleanor's condition worsened suddenly. She collapsed in her bedroom, and though the hospital tried, her frail body could no longer keep up with her fierce spirit. With her lawyer by her side, she gave one final instruction: deliver the package to Jordan. And then, with dignity and quiet strength, Eleanor Whitfield slipped away. The morning after Eleanor's passing, Jordan opened his apartment door to find a courier waiting with a small brown parcel. His name was written across it in Eleanor's elegant script. For a long moment, he couldn't bring himself to move. His hands trembled as he signed, his chest heavy with the weight of knowing she was gone. Inside the box lay a bundle of papers, a brass key with a ginkgo charm tied to it, and a folded letter. Jordan unfolded the paper slowly, hearing her voice in every word. "Every heavy door was lighter because you stood beside me. Carry this forward. The key will guide you." Tears blurred his vision as he traced the ginkgo charm with his thumb. It was the same symbol she'd pressed into his sketchbook months ago, telling him it stood for resilience and endurance. Now it carried her memory. The documents explained more than he could have imagined. Eleanor had left him her home, her quiet refuge filled with books and history. She had also established the Whitfield Fellowship for Inclusive Design, a fund dedicated to training young workers in hospitality, upgrading accessibility in public spaces, and supporting scholarships for underrepresented students. But the letter hinted at something more. "Find the model with the missing ramp," she had written. That night, Jordan searched her home. In a corner of her study sat a cardboard model of a building, one ramp unfinished, a small panel taped shut. With trembling fingers, he opened it and found an envelope tucked inside. The envelope held confirmation, the house deed, the trust papers, and a check large enough to cover his mother's care, his sister's tuition, and the debts that had haunted him for months. For the first time in years, Jordan felt the crushing weight in his chest lift, but along with relief came something stronger: responsibility. Eleanor hadn't just left him security, she had left him a mission. The days after Eleanor's funeral were heavy. Jordan moved carefully through her home, each room echoing with her presence. Her garden, lined with ginkgo trees, swayed softly in the winter wind, and he found himself sitting there for hours, holding the brass key like a talisman. But grief soon gave way to action. With Eleanor's trust and fellowship fund, Jordan began untangling the knots in his life. His mother's medical bills were paid in full, easing her pain and lifting the constant cloud of worry. His sister Tasha enrolled in her nursing program without fear of debt. The eviction notice on his apartment became meaningless, because now he had a home. Yet Jordan knew this wasn't just about him. Eleanor's letter had been clear: carry this forward. He returned to the brass spoon not just as a waiter, but as someone determined to change the culture. With Mr. Stevens' backing, he helped draft new training programs focused on empathy and inclusivity. Staff learned how to serve with dignity, not performance, and to welcome every customer as more than a transaction. The community felt it too. With the fellowship funds, ramps were installed at local businesses, scholarships were awarded to young workers from underrepresented backgrounds, and the story of the waiter and the teacher spread as a symbol of quiet courage. One evening, as Jordan stood in the restaurant watching a family laugh over dinner, he realized the space had transformed. The air felt lighter, warmer, closer to the vision Eleanor had always believed was possible. But it was in her garden, beneath the golden leaves of the ginkgo trees, that he felt her most. Standing there at dusk, Jordan whispered a promise. "You weren't just my Friday night. You were my compass, and I'll make sure your light doesn't fade." The wind rustled the branches, and for a moment, it felt as though Eleanor had answered back. Spring arrived in Harbor City, and with it came change. The brass spoon, once known as a white linen hangout where Jordan felt like an outsider, now buzzed with a different kind of energy. Families of all backgrounds filled its tables. Staff carried themselves with pride instead of fear. And at the front entrance, the old heavy oak door had been replaced with an automatic glass one. Jordan stood outside one evening, watching as it swung open with a soft hiss to let an elderly couple pass through with ease. For a moment, he saw Eleanor there again, struggling against that same door, her hands shaking, before he first rushed to her side. Now, the barrier that had once symbolized exclusion was gone, replaced by something open, effortless, and welcoming. He smiled and stepped inside. Patrons nodded at him, some whispering his name. To them, he wasn't just a waiter anymore. He was the man who had stood up when silence would have been easier, the man who had carried forward a teacher's lessons. That night, after closing, Jordan walked home to Eleanor's house. The garden glowed under the streetlights, the ginkgo leaves trembling gently as if in approval. He sat on the porch, the brass key warm in his palm, and opened her final note once more. "It's not about what we leave for people, Jordan. It's about what we leave in them. You were my Friday night light. Now you are someone else's." Jordan leaned back, the ache in his chest replaced with quiet peace. For years he had carried bricks of burden, poverty, prejudice, invisibility. Now what he carried was purpose. Eleanor had given him more than a home or money. She had entrusted him with a mission to ensure no door, literal or figurative, would ever be too heavy for someone else. And so, as the wind whispered through the ginkgo trees, Jordan closed his eyes and smiled. The story of the waiter and the teacher had ended, but the legacy they built together had only just begun. This story shows how courage and loyalty can break through prejudice. Jordan defended Eleanor when silence would have been easier, and she left him more than a home. She left him a mission. Together, they proved that no one is invisible when dignity is protected. Should Jordan have risked his job that night, and was Eleanor right to entrust her legacy to him? Share your thoughts in the comments. Like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from, because no door should ever be too heavy to open. Thank you for staying till the end.